Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Good evening, friends. Welcome to this Tuesday night, June 16, 2015 edition of Nightcast. Our opening story for tonight, 5 Irish students and another young woman have been killed when a fourth-floor balcony in California collapsed.
A 21st birthday party was underway for one of the Irish students when the fourth-floor balcony collapsed and landed on the balcony below. 13 people were celebrating when the structure broke loose and tipped forward, spilling victims onto the pavement beneath.
Ireland is a small country, and when you have the numbers that we had here today, very few of us have been left untouched by this tragedy.
5 of the dead were 21-year-olds from Ireland: Olivia Burke, Owen Culligan, Nikolai Schuster, Lorcan Miller and Emil Walsh. 22-year-old Ashley Donahue from California also died. Fellow students are in shock.
Everyone's just pretty shocked, and our thoughts are with all the families back home, really. Yeah. It's just a tragedy, it's horrible.
I came out at midnight and I saw all the rubble on the ground and just Irish people just crying in tears, and I'd like to send my condolences to everyone back home.
Addressing the Irish Parliament, the Taoiseach said he was heartbroken for the families of those who died.
It's with great sadness that I confirm that a number of young Irish citizens have lost their lives while a number of others have been seriously injured. It is truly terrible to have such a serious and sad incident take place at the beginning of a summer of adventure and opportunity.
Of those taken to hospital, several are thought to have suffered life-threatening injuries. Fianna Fáil's Micheál Martin paid tribute to the young people who'd lost their lives in what he called the beauty of an American summer. David Willis, BBC News, Southern California.
Thank you, David Willis. The incident happened in the early hours this morning, Tuesday morning, in the university town of Berkeley. 7 others beside these 5, and actually the count has been increased to 6, but 5 or 6 killed and 7 others hurt. Irish officials say the students were holding a birthday party at the time, but it's not yet known why the collapse. And that was David Willis with that report. Friends, it reminds me, many of you know, that there was a servant of God who used to remind us of a birthday party being held by the sons and daughters of Job, where there was a big calamity that killed his sons. And Mr. Armstrong would remind us that there is a verse in Job that says the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth, and he would encourage us to avoid the kind of birthday celebrations that the world is known for. And had these Irish students been heard and heeded the advice of God's servant for the end time, that incident would likely not have happened. All those people wouldn't have been there celebrating a birthday party. I just mention that because that is a doctrine that Mr. Armstrong left with us, that he loosened up a little bit to say it would be okay to honor the elder age when they represented a benchmark like 70 years, 75 years, 80 years. A benchmark might be okay to honor their years on the earth, but keeping in mind that the doctrinal principle that the day of one's death is better than the day of one's birth. Let's go on. The Italian police have forcibly removed many people who had migrated from Africa, who were attempting to cross the border into France. There was anger and protest from people who were being moved, who included women and children. France has closed its border to migrants, as you'll see in this video with Lucy Williamson reporting from Leah.
Getting here used to be the difficult bit. Now, leaving Italy is becoming just as hard. The French border is just a few meters away, but these new arrivals aren't being allowed across. A punch in the face of Europe, Italy has called it. With numbers here building, today the Italian police began to move the migrants back further inland. It's not what Italy or the migrants want.
Well, the Italian police had their orders to clear some of the camps just here by the French border. You can hear the kind of resistance they're up against. Women and children now being loaded onto buses to take them back into Italy.
Among the targets today was 19-year-old Saddam, clinging to his mother and 10-year-old sister to resist the eviction.
They're acting with us like a terrorist, like animals, like who come from another planet. There is no human rights here.
Migrants caught sneaking over the border are frog-marched back by French police. A game of ping-pong, as one aid worker put it, with migrants as the balls. Upsetting, says Ventimiglia's mayor, because France has always been a friend.
If we are all in the EU and the European community, there needs to be solidarity and the ability to work together. This image can't be the one we portray to the world today. This is not just a matter for governments. We tend to blame governments, but it's a question for the European populations.
EU ministers met today to discuss sharing Europe's migrants between them. But there's resistance among some member states. Britain has already said it will opt out. And Italy fears being left to shoulder this burden alone. Unable to stem the flow of migrants in or to offer them a route out, transit camps like this one now dot Italy from top to toe in Sicily, Ventimiglia and in Rome. And today hundreds more came to join them, rescued from a wooden barge and a dinghy off the Libyan coast. Among them 90 women and children. Each one saved from the Mediterranean Sea, a drop in Italy's own ocean. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, Ventimiglia.
First today, the European unions were to be discussing some of the proposals in Luxembourg on what they want to do regarding the EU migrancy situation with all this illegal ships coming over with migrants. We'll be looking in the days ahead to what the results of what the discussions and results from today's meetings were regarding all these migrants on board the ships that they wind up having to rescue. And these are, again, illegal ships. In the meantime, until that decision and we can get a report on what they discussed today, we have this report from BBC's diplomatic correspondent Paul Adams, who was looking at some of the opinions open to the EU.
Everyone agrees Europe has to find some big solutions to a big problem, and soon. But what can European countries actually achieve? Last month, the EU unveiled some bold proposals. Most eye-catching, a military and intelligence operation to tackle people smuggling across the Mediterranean, including the destruction of boats used by Libyan smugglers. But that needs a UN resolution authorising the use of force. Russia has strong reservations, as does Libya's internationally recognised government. Nothing much can happen without it. Then there's something almost no one seems to agree on, a plan to relocate 40,000 refugees who've arrived recently in Italy and Greece, and settle another 20,000 from outside the EU. France and Germany both want significant changes to the quota system. Spain says it has its own problems with illegal immigrants and high unemployment. Hungary's Prime Minister says the whole scheme borders on insanity. And some countries, Britain, Denmark and Ireland, would be exempt. Human rights groups say the plan represents the bare minimum of what's needed to meet this growing humanitarian challenge. But right now, the chances of it being adopted soon seem slender.
And first, for our last story tonight, it relates to one of the SEALs. All right. Let me get back here. Get our button straightened out. I forgot to... let's see, do I have the right button ready to go? Yeah, I forgot to switch switcher banks. I wanted to go here for just a moment. Okay. In our last story for tonight, an Italian magazine has published a leaked draft of the Pope's encyclical on climate change. Now, this last story is going to relate, let's bring our chart up just for a moment before we give that last story. It's going to relate to that first seal you see in the first column there where it says white, which indicates that in the book of Revelation, the first seal is depicted by a white horse. You see the little white horse up above the number 1, and then the white column, and below that it says deception. And we're talking about religious deception and antichrist and false Christ is the first seal. And that relates to our next story. Again, the Pope's encyclical on climate change is something that was leaked in an Italian magazine, a draft of that encyclical that is due for release on Thursday. In it, the Pope Francis, puts much of the blame for global warming on human activity and calls on all humans, not just Roman Catholics, to prevent the destruction of the ecosystem before the end of the century. He's going to be calling for UN action on it, and it's going to get the Pope more and more politically involved in things.
This week, a seemingly unlikely figure will say that global warming is a major threat to life on our planet. He'll say that it's our fault, and we need to urgently cut our fossil fuel consumption. Pope Francis's new encyclical, Laudato Si', will be published on Thursday, and it will mark a bold step for the Church into this debate as it tries to push the UN's members into action. The Vatican has long been concerned about climate change. What's novel is the ferocity with which this Pope is pursuing it as a cause. You can see that in a leaked version of the encyclical which emerged this afternoon. In it, Pope Francis compares himself to Pope John XXIII, who had to write an encyclical in 1963 on world peace. That was the Vatican's response to the Cuban Missile Crisis, which almost wiped out humanity. That's how seriously the Vatican is now taking climate change.
The Pope is making this statement on climate change on the back of a report published at the end of April by the Pontifical Academy of Sciences. And if that sounds too churchy a title, one of the signatories includes Martin Rees, Lord Rees, the Astronomer Royal of the United Kingdom. I think the Pope wants to make this statement about climate change because he regards it, and I think quite rightly, as a moral and an ethical issue, as well as a scientific issue.
The rich world's responsibility to the developing world is one of the Pope's key motivations.
He took the name St. Francis, and when he did so, he said that it was the name of the saint of the poor, the saint of nature, the saint of peace. And those were the three things that were prominent in his mission. He called himself a Pope who wanted a poor church for the poor.
But US conservative Catholics, like Rick Santorum, a Republican presidential candidate, have already set out their opposition to the encyclical.
There are a lot of conservatives who are deeply opposed to all of this. They're suspicious of Francis talking about detailed things like trickle-down economics or the science of climate change. They say, keep out of that, stick to theology. He says, no, the church is not like that. The church has to be involved in the world.
Pope Francis has chosen to issue this statement as an encyclical. That's the highest form, the most authoritative form of utterance he can make. He's saying this is authoritative teaching. It doesn't mean you can't disagree with it. It doesn't mean if you disagree with it, you're not a Catholic. It does mean that the Pope has chosen to issue something which he regards as very authoritative, and you're then disagreeing with it.
Some worry that curbing carbon might hurt today's poor by delaying economic growth by more than it helps the poor of the future. So, even among believers, a man whose arrival was marked with a cloud of smoke has a fight on his hands when it comes to emissions.
All right, friends, and with that, that's the end of our report for this Tuesday evening of Nightcast. I will mention back, though, before we sign off, that related to the first story tonight, let me pull out for a moment and go to this chart up above my shoulder, just over here. There's a photograph down at the bottom left corner, if we can zoom in on that shot. This shot represents Jesus Christ as the rock coming down from the heaven when he returns for his second return and smashing the toes of the great image of Daniel 2, a great image that represents all of the governments of this world, which at the end time will have been overpowered, more or less, by the Roman Empire's restoration as the Holy Roman Empire. And all of the governments of man, because that Holy Roman Empire will be a world-ruling empire. And when Christ returns, he will smash all of the world's governments, and the calendar of the Holy Roman Empire, the Roman calendar, which much of the whole world uses, that's going to go out with the going out of the governments of this world. And therefore, friends, just a small point. All of the celebrations that are done today with respect or regard to or related to the Roman calendar, that'll be a thing of the past. The things that God will allow us to celebrate during the world tomorrow will be things based date-wise on the Hebrew calendar, which is God's sacred calendar. That is the calendar of the future. No more Roman calendar once the event represented by this Christ smashing the governments of this world on the toes and ushering in and restoring the kingdom of God to this earth. Boom, that'll all be gone. Again, that the governments of this world and the calendar of this world, the Roman calendar, gone forever. All right, again, friends, that's it for this. Once Christ returns, it'll be gone forever. That's it for this Tuesday night. Thanks for joining me. God willing, and the creek don't rise. We'll be back again tomorrow night, Wednesday night, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy here on Nightcast. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying so long and good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.